Yeah.
And remember, no business is successful on a linear line.
Yeah.
Every single business goes through lots of hell. I love entrepreneurs who are like, I know what I'm taking from you is a responsibility. And because it's a responsibility, I will tell you everything I'm going to do with it. I've invested in China, I've invested in the States, I've invested in Europe. I've had the privilege of working with entrepreneurs. Entitlement is a human characteristic that comes in every shape, way, and form all around the world. It's a mindset issue. Knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you want to do, right? Don't ever answer the question around what do you want to do next or how you're going to make the next move. Tell me what's going to happen after that. You can figure that out. You always know where to go.
Hello. So welcome to the Lucidity Insights podcast called The Perfect Pitch. I'm here today with Basil Moftah at Nclude, who's also been an investor in the region for the last 7 years. And we're going to talk about everything from the investing landscape in the region, what's going on in Egypt, because that's where Nclude has been predominantly investing in. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And the startup ecosystem across the region, what's going on. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Erica. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, beautiful. So Basil, the first time we spoke, your story intrigued me. You're an Egyptian who was born in Chicago and grew up in Trinidad and Tobago until you moved back to Egypt at 8 years old.
Correct.
Tell me how that has shaped you.
I've always felt like I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? So if you're in Egypt, I feel very American, or I'm made to feel very American.
Yeah.
And when I'm in the States, I'm made to feel very Arab or Egyptian, if you like. So the kind of walking in other people's shoes has been a bit of a mantra for me.
Yeah, I feel like Dubai collects people like that.
For sure.
I'm half Japanese, but half Canadian, grew up in Canada. And I feel like that everywhere. I feel like I'm part everything.
I see it as a huge advantage, right? Because I see it like you can see the other point of view, the other side. People find it odd that I can always argue the opposite side of any argument.
So you're a little argumentative.
I am, yes.
So also what intrigued me was your sort of entry into venture capital. When I look back at your story, it makes me think like it was kind of written in the stars. You started out, though, as a typical Arab, I would say, graduating from engineering.
Yeah.
And you hated it. Tell me more.
Yeah, so the last semester of my engineering degree at the American University in Cairo, I got into an internship at Procter & Gamble. It was the most boring experience of my life, right? I sat I was at the factory and I was working in procurement department and we ran out of blue dye and my job was to find blue dye and have it imported so that we can make Ariel with those blue little dots in them, that you find. I was like, this can't be engineering. If this is engineering, I definitely don't want to do anything. I think I ended up being one of the very few, if not the only intern to ever quit in the middle of the internship program. I was like, what's the minimum number of days I need for my credits here? Then it turned out to be like 6 weeks and it was like an 8 or 12 week program. I was like, at 6 weeks and 1 hour, I walked into HR, I was like, I'm quitting. And they literally looked at me like I was insane.
Wow.
But I'm saying all of that because if knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you want to do, right? And I knew very quickly I wasn't going to do engineering. I had more fun doing things like Model United Nations, Model Arab League. I was very in the what's happening in the world stage, global, etc. And so this catalyzed me to immediately kind of leave Egypt. So the first job I took was actually in Italy. And so it allowed me like very quickly to say, I want to be on, I want to be on the global stage. I want to do, something outside of just the region. And so one thing leads to another, I guess.
And what was that gig that you took in Italy?
So it was with Reuters.
Oh, you started in Italy with Reuters?
Yes,
okay.
I did. So I think the first month was Cairo, and then the first year was in Italy, was in Rome.
Okay.
But it was a great experience, lots of fun. I thought I was joining a news agency. It turned out it was a data company. So I wasn't really aware of where I was joining, but the only thing they said to me was, you're going to get to travel the world. And within the first year, they moved me into their VC arm, which is surprising. I was like, can I do marketing? And they're like, no, we want you to try venture capital. I'm like, what's that? I really don't know I would like to do marketing. I understand that.
Did they actually call it corporate venture capital?
They did, yeah.
Okay.
It was a VC arm. Reuters was inevitably scared, I think is the word, or worried about this thing called the internet, 1997, 98. So this idea that information was going to be free was exactly the opposite of what Reuters does, right? Reuters sells information, news, data, et cetera, like Bloomberg. And so the point being, they wanted to invest in companies that potentially could disrupt our business. So that's what they set up, a venture capital arm. It's called the Greenhouse Fund, $400 million. We made 86 investments, I think, in total. Many of them failed, which was, for me, coming from this part of the world, was like, things fail and that's okay. Was very surprising. But one of those investments, there were several investments I worked on, but one of the more interesting ones was like Yahoo. So we invested $5 million in Yahoo early stage, and I think it gave us back $400 million in returns. Wow. So clearly a big winner.
So that was the one that paid for your fund?
Yes, that's the one that paid, the partners, yes. Yeah. I think I just got a salary. Yeah. But nonetheless, I was, too young, too junior then to know better. But nonetheless, what I did learn was this whole world of disruption, technology, the internet clearly at that time was going to be a force. All of that became very clear in that experience. Yeah. And so then became, okay, so where do I go from here, right? So I had to do I thought, okay, I need to do an MBA. This is not going to work with a mechanical engineering degree. I don't know what a balance sheet and a P&L are. And, I needed to learn a few things. And I also realized that, and it wasn't the intention to come back into venture necessarily, but that having P&L experience, running P&L was important, right? Yeah. And so once I finished my MBA, I, started running businesses across Europe, emerging markets all over the place, in the US, etc. And learning to run a business, managing people, managing a P&L, managing a product are incredibly useful skills to have when I eventually ended up back in VC.
So you actually went corporate VC for a couple of years, went to Harvard. We were talking about whether we name drop that or not, but it's an important name. And then you came back and you started managing different business units for Reuters, but you were actually out of the venture space. Yes. Mm-hmm. So you were really operating at that point.
Yeah. The first business was a business in Europe called Business Direct. Essentially, it's all small customers of Reuters. So I think we had something like 4,000 customers that we were managing. It's all done remotely, like a call center type of thing. A lot of them are commodity traders, energy traders, small hedge funds, FX traders. And so very high-end caliber, but small offices, if that makes sense, right? People. So that was the first business. And then I ran Middle East and Africa out of Dubai. So the first time I came to Dubai was 2008. And ran the region from here. Obviously, it was an incredibly interesting year because I arrived, it was booming. Within a year, it wasn't. It was going through a lot of changes and a lot of stress, but we still managed to grow the business. Okay. That's a different story for a different time of how we did that. But then did the Zawiya acquisition. So bought Zawiya.com for Reuters in 2012. So that was a super exciting thing to do. And it was actually the reason why I got back into venture, interestingly enough, is directly linked to Zawiya. Because what happened was Zawiya was being really a pain to us, right? I mean, like they were starting to eat market share from us, and they were starting to put pressure on our business. And we wanted to buy it so that we can get it out of the market, essentially. It's not a nice thing to say, but that's what big companies do.
Business.
Yeah, it's business.
But did they know that?
They didn't know that. They didn't know that.
They thought, they're going to invest in us and we're going to figure out how we're going to be synergistic together. And
there was definitely parts of it that we were willing to invest in, to be fair. But the main purpose was to make sure that they stopped putting pricing pressure on our flagship products. So we were doing both, to be fair.
Yeah.
But what the problem was, we were able to buy it at a very good price, I would say, because there was no local VCs willing to invest in Zawiya, and Zawiya was a startup. So Ihsan was now at STC as an investor there, which I'm glad he is, because he's a really great operator, was struggling at a time when there was no venture capital in the region. And had he raised just a few $1 million, he would have been worth a lot more to us.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Right.
But he didn't know that. The market didn't know that. So
yeah, back in 2011, 12, the VC ecosystem here was pretty nascent. I mean, there was a couple of players, but pretty small.
Yeah, there was Fedi Ghandour, Wamda. I'm not even sure MEVP was around.
It was Wamda at the time.
Yes, it was exactly. It was Fedi.
Yeah,
they're all by name of, you name them by individuals here, not by names of institutions. But the reason why I mention all of that is it was a good memory that came back later on in my career. Ran a bunch of other businesses out of the States. I ran a global intellectual property and science business for Thomson Reuters, which had become Thomson Reuters, all of that stuff. And then eventually, after the sale of the IP and science business, returned here in the region and joined Global Ventures as a general partner. I was a part of Dubai Angel Investors as well, doing a lot of early stage investing. So did 40, 50, 60 transactions, something like that, quite a massive number of transactions.
Yeah.
Then set up something called Nclude, which is a financial inclusion fund for Egypt. That's where the passion came in.
Yeah.
Around in my home country that I had been away for 20 years from and wanted to do something there. And eventually started doing that. Yeah.
So let's talk about Nclude. Let's talk about, and also your time before venture capital from Dubai across the region, I think mostly in fintech and healthcare.
Yes.
And health tech. Also, tell me why you wanted to come back to the region. I mean, Egyptian roots, but you worked across Europe and the US.
Yeah.
What made you go, you know what? For my next chapter, I think Dubai's the place for me.
It's I don't know if there was a thoughtful reason to come to Dubai besides the usual. You get married, you have kids, you look at the size of an apartment in London, and you look for the same price. You look at the size of a villa or an apartment here in Dubai, and you kind of go, okay, I'm either gonna go stir crazy with the kids, or I'm gonna get a bit extra space. So, nothing too sophisticated, but let's put it this way: at that point in my life, I married, kids, and Dubai felt like a more comfortable place from a family perspective.
Okay.
Obviously, there is some nostalgia. I can give you a story around the nostalgia of living abroad for so long and seeing all the things you see, and then realizing the region is behind and there's an opportunity to make a difference. That definitely was a thought process, but it wasn't the motivator. I can't glorify what it was simply like, we need space and we'd like to have it in a nice city. And thankfully, Dubai has been great to us. I mean, it's the journey of Dubai alone is a story, to be written about in the last decade, how it's expanded and grown in business. Being able to be part of the venture scene here has been exciting because seeing it evolve each year, it's been different.
Yeah. And so tell us a bit about that. What have you seen change? I've been here in the region for 15 years, although I haven't really kept my pulse on the VC scene from back then. But it really feels like it's erupted in the last 5 years in particular. What is the ecosystem like from your perspective, and what is it doing well and what is it not doing well?
Yeah. There's so many different angles and aspects of that. So it's a difficult question to answer coherently, but let's take a couple of those angles. First of all, there's a global trend around technology, right? There's an entire generation now. My daughter is 22 this year. And so these are children who were born after the wireless cellular phone was developed, right? So they're used to being on the phone. They're used to being on computers. The mobile first generation, if you like, right? And apps and everything that goes with it. So by definition, this wave had come its time to arrive here in the region. There were some early entrepreneurs who figured this out before there was money available. And for me, those are the the most resilient entrepreneurs you can ever meet. They actually built businesses like Mom's World, Mona Ataya and Lena there. And there are many other examples. Kareem, and we know the story about Kareem and Uber and all of that, Sue and Amazon, and all of these Mudassir, etc., all of these entrepreneurs who really built something out of nothing, right? Money wasn't available. There was no form of VC. If you wanted to raise capital, you went to Fadi Ghandour or you went to Walid Mansour, at MEVP. And I don't even think MEVP had existed. Like it was him personally making some of those investments. So those are generation one, right? Then what happened really, and as you mentioned 5 years ago, is the confluence of these events, global trend, COVID, and the governments here becoming more aware of needing to invest in local entrepreneurs. It's not like Mubadala or PIF didn't know that technology is a trend, but they were just investing globally. They weren't investing locally. And all of a sudden, they set up local fund of funds, if you like, right? And they were given a mandate or they pursued a mandate of investing in local VC funds. And at the same time, some of these companies have started to show some success, right? So we'd seen some exits. And so all of a sudden it's like, hold on a minute, there's an opportunity here. And so some people started to build funds and investment vehicles, etc. Very unprofessional, right? It's still very cowboyish. People doing deals, trying to figure out what to do. I've seen term sheets and shareholders agreements that I swear you wouldn't even know how to read them because of the complexity of them. In some cases, you had investors taking 51% of the company. That's not VC. I don't know what that is, but that's not VC. So they start, taking wrong stakes, wrong sizes, entrepreneurs being treated like employees. It was very messy. And then I'd say the last phase, which we're in now, and we can talk about what's going to happen next, but what the phase we're in now is the professionalizing of the industry. All of a sudden, the VC firms with the type of LPs coming in, investors, limited partners, put in money, are asking for a professional way to work. Standards started to emerge, using NVCA, North Venture Capital Associations, like documentation. People started following things like safe notes, which is the Y Combinator's method of doing convertible notes. So the legal side, technical side of it became a lot more professional. People who understood how this works as minority shareholders started to appear and become more active. A lot more money started to appear in it. So family offices, individuals, everybody went a little bit stir crazy, a little bit too crazy. So valuations obviously got reflected, in that sense. And we ended up with a overhyped, overvalued, but professional industry, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. Associations, conferences, events, meetups, demo days, you name it. The full ecosystem started to evolve. New products like venture debt started to evolve as well. And so that's kind of the phase that we're in now, but we're coming towards the end of it, right? Because there's been a correction, there's been an adjustment. Some of these professional things, people are now like, okay, so what do we do now? If we paid 100 for something that's worth 20, what do I do with it now? Do I put more money into it? Do I shut it down? So some of the learnings are starting to assimilate now. And we're at a very, very interesting moment for VC in the region.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I'm curious, let's talk about what you think might happen next here. Have you seen, first of all, as it's professionalizing, is there a graveyard of sort of investors and VCs with, their tail tucked behind their legs? Or is their vintages so long that they're kind of still around?
Yeah. No, the graveyard isn't there yet. The graveyard is coming. We will see and hear about zombie funds and zombie management firms and things that didn't work out. That's inevitable. It's not uncommon in the industry, and there's nothing bad about it per se. This is an industry that is meant to have a few big successes and many failures in it. So in that sense, it's normal, right? However, it's delayed. And the reason why it's delayed in VC is because of the preferred equity structure. So investors, when they give money in VC, the reason why they can afford to pay at higher valuations is because they also take a right called preferred shares, which means their money sits on top of the stack. And so if I put in $10, let's say, on a company worth 100, and now it's worth 20, my $10 are still superior to the 20. So there's usually an attempt at this point to either sell and recover the 10, or to try to bring it up to 100 again through changing strategies, plans, doing something with the business that you didn't foresee before. And so what happens in VC is death is sometimes a little bit slower than it should be. Companies take a long time trying to recover, what's called pivoting, changing tactics, selling their assets to another bigger player. All sorts of M&A will start to take place. A lot of activities will start to take place. So the actual scorecard of who's done well and who hasn't done well doesn't come out for a couple more years. Right? Because all of this disruption is about to take place around, well, you paid X for it, doesn't matter. I still have preferred shares. I want to recover my cash. So can I sell it for half of X and still get my money back because I'm preferred shares? So that's where we are in terms of phase, right? So if somebody told you, oh no, that's a great fund and that's a really bad fund, that isn't necessarily true. Let's put it that way. It all depends on how the managers spend their time now with the assets they have invested in and how they recover their cash or recover those businesses. And you could still be looking pretty grim and end up doing amazing because, you pivot the company and it takes off. And you could still be looking good on paper and end up not really realizing it because those businesses don't survive for one reason or another.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And it's going to be brutal.
Oh, gosh. It's funny as I'm reflecting on your story as you're talking, and I'm thinking about your internships that you quit.
Sure.
And a couple other incidences, and the way that you do business. I feel like you might have that ability to quit when it's right.
Yeah. Well,
is that one of your have you asked a startup, like, guys, you could spend the next 7 years trying to rebuild this, yeah, but it's literally going to just build back to what it used to be?
Let me put it this way. I've had a bunch of very unpleasant conversations recently with some of the startups about is it worth continuing the journey, or is it better to sell the assets you have now, take the lessons you've learned and move on to the next one? And I'm always reminded of a story back when I was in California and San Francisco. I remember an entrepreneur coming to me and saying, I've tried this idea 4 times. I failed 4 times. This is now my 5th time to build something similar to the space that they're in, or the idea that they have. But with all the lessons I've now learned, I'm sure I'm going to be successful on the 5th time. And without knowing anything else, would you take that bet or not?
Yeah.
Which one is it? Is experience a positive or a negative? And if that experience is failure, how does that change your perspective on the experience? And I think we all know the old expressions around you learn more from the things you fail at than from the things you succeed at. We all know that somebody who's gone through a difficult experience actually becomes more resilient, more thicker skin, able to withstand pressure, which, entrepreneurship is nothing but pressure. So there's lots of characteristics of failure that are undervalued sometimes in decision making. And so the answer is actually maybe 5th time is a charm. Now, there is a question about why is it the 5th time, right? I mean, is 2 experiences enough to learn from, or is there a pivoting point, or is there like a tipping point where, oh my God, this guy just always fails, right? This is repeating the same mistakes. I think the answer to the question is, or to the point you're trying to, you were asking me about is, yeah, the entrepreneurs in the region lack experience on downturns, so they don't know when it's better to quit and try again and use the learning that they did in a different format, in a different setup with maybe less equity or less dilution. And there's all these, elements, details we can get into, versus the ego and the stubbornness of first-time entrepreneurs who simply say, I just want to keep going. I can't fail. I have to prove I'm right? Or I have to prove I'm successful. There's merit in sometimes starting over and taking the learnings.
It's interesting because, I've heard from various investors in the region, and they say, I've heard the whole gamut. On one hand, many say, like you, that, yeah, there is ego involved, and many, startup founders don't want to quit, which is beautiful on one level. Like they have grit. There might be a sense of responsibility to the funding that they've gotten and that they really want to get somewhere. But on the other hand, I've heard the story of entrepreneurs in the region feeling super entitled to being funded, and that they don't actually take seriously what it means to get VC funding. What does it mean to the business? What kind of responsibility do you have now that you have shareholders?
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah.
What you've seen?
Those two statements, by the way, are not contradictory in my mind. Those two statements can actually happen together.
Yeah.
There is grit in entrepreneurs, but and that is one of the key things investors look for. If there isn't a certain level of grit, hustle, thick skin, whatever you want to call it, you're not going to make it. Let's just call it what it is. Yeah. And in some ways it's great, but it can't also be your Achilles heel, right? It can't be the element where you're so stubborn to the point that you cannot see the forest and the trees. You can't see the way through difficult situations, or know when to just simply say enough is enough.
It's a cliche, isn't it? Because
it is absolutely a cliche.
Yeah.
But you have no idea how many times you face that, right?
Yeah.
People just want to keep going. They want to prove they're right.
Often people's biggest strength is their biggest weakness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you see that in entrepreneurs all the time. And by the way, it's not a regional thing. It's a global thing.
Yeah. It's
a human thing. The difference is, though, the region as a whole is inexperienced. Mm. And so that means there isn't examples where people have failed once and then started again and then been successful, where people can say it's okay to do that. We're still in that very early innings of this industry, where we only talk about the success and we don't talk enough about the failures. But to your other part about entitlement, there is no doubt that we over-celebrate fundraisers. It's the silliest, dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life, right? It's like you raise money, people send congratulation notes to each other. It makes it into the newspaper. There's press releases about it. It gets announced at events. There's these pictures of winners of somebody won $10,000 or $100 or whatever for, their idea. I understand why we do it. We're humans, and these are easy moments to celebrate. But if you think about it, how one person spends $1 million and how another person spends $1 million is actually much more important, right?
And then you would argue that the reason why we celebrate those fundraisers is because that is all that's transparent. Those are the only indicators that we can measure.
Yeah, sure. And listen, news and media and people have to, you need to sell eyeballs or paper or whatever it is. And so these are easy things to put up on websites and drive traffic. And we're all interested to hear about other people, raising money. Sure. But what you're talking about is different, right? What you're talking about is the attitude and the value of the founders when it comes to taking the money. And here's the subtlety, and this is something investors listen to very, very carefully. When I give you the money, are you taking the money because you think you deserve it? Or are you taking the money because you are taking on a responsibility to grow my money, and you realize that this is a burden on you as an entrepreneur to take on that money? And the language set, the body language and the attitude of entrepreneurs when you meet with them, for at least the sophisticated investors I know in the region, is very sensitive to this point. If it's kind of in the zone of I'm the best person on earth and my company is worth so much and you should give me money and I will, I deserve to get this money, and if you don't give me, somebody else will. And I'm exaggerating for effect, but you get the idea. You stay away from those entrepreneurs. They may be successful and I wish them all the best, but it becomes very difficult to manage the relationship after that because they are not transparent. They do not share information. When things go wrong, they don't want to say because they remember they're coming from that entitlement perspective. I love entrepreneurs who are like, I know what I'm taking from you is a responsibility. And because it's a responsibility, I will tell you everything I'm going to do with it. And I will keep you updated on a regular basis. And there are entrepreneurs out there who have failed with their business or their business haven't gone well. And I have now 3 personal investments in entrepreneurs in companies where they failed the first time. They're now starting their second one, but it's because of how they handled the first one and the keeping, me informed and keeping me part of the journey that I'm willing to back them again. And that's a big thing.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's a good reminder for a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm curious, we are exaggerating for effect these sort of 2 types of entrepreneurs, but would you say that it's more common, like the entitled entrepreneur is? I've heard various degrees of this.
In the region you mean versus globally?
Yeah.
No, I've invested in China. I've invested in the States. I've invested in Europe. I've had the privilege of working with entrepreneurs. Entitlement is a human characteristic that comes in every shape, way, and form all around the world. It's a mindset issue. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there have been some very successful entrepreneurs who are very entitled, very confident, come in a certain way. They're just not my type, right? I don't want to be in this adversarial conversation. I want to be able to have open, transparent conversations.
Yeah.
And remember, no business is successful on a linear line.
Yeah.
Every single business goes through lots of hell in the middle. And what seems from the outside as successful is never true, right? That may be the marketing projection of a brand, but it's not the reality. Employees are disgruntled. You have to hire people and then you end up firing them because they weren't what you expected. People steal, cheat, and lie. Customers don't pay you on time, pay you late. You're a startup. Getting paid is important, right? There's all sorts of problems that go on. It's the founders who see that their job is to manage that on behalf of their investors and to keep the investors in the loop, who understand their role, as opposed to it's a personal issue for them, then they have to look perfect to everybody all the time that I'm personally looking for, let's say.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Nclude and Egypt. I did some digging right before this and found last year in 2022, Egypt was home to 17% of all scale-ups in Africa. So scale-ups being startups that have raised over $1 million, and home to 13% of all fintech scale-ups in Africa. We all know in the region, Egypt's number 3 goes UAE, Saudi, Egypt. And Africa, it seems to be the same. It's Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, with sometimes Egypt kind of climbing on that.
Yeah.
And Nclude is all about financial inclusion, or investing in fintechs for that. Tell me why. I mean, for those of us who out there that don't know the financial inclusion issue.
At the same time, Egypt on the scale of financial inclusion is in the bottom quartile, if I remember correctly. Maybe it's changed in the last year or 2, but it's still way below where it should be. What does financial inclusion mean? The number of bank accounts, the number of credit cards, the number of, banked individuals and businesses is incredibly low. Yeah. So to put it into perspective, less than 3% of the population actually has a credit card. Have access to credit. Less than, I think it's 20% have debit card. And definitely more than half the population doesn't have a bank account, right? Now, some of that's, the youth it's still a very young population. So there's some of it is very much related to
the youthfulness.
Yeah, the shape of the population, if you want. But even on the business side, it's pretty bad. There's all these informal businesses, vendors who sell things on the corner of streets, shops that don't have tax records. They don't pay taxes. They do cash transactions, all sorts of different.
It's a heavy cash society.
Sure. I think it's like 60-70% of all transactions are cash. Now, why am I mentioning all of this? Because the premise of the fund is to go straight at how do we get more people into the banking system using technology, right? And so either looking at it through a horizontal or vertical lens. Horizontal lens is payments, credit, savings, trading, securities trading, etc. So that's the horizontal lens. And the vertical lens is looking at things like supply chains, education, healthcare, the big industries and how do they digitally operate. And Nclude is trying to invest in both directions. So we've done payments investments like PayMob, for example. and Lucky, which is a credit provider to consumers, right? Like a buy now, pay later type of deal. It's not exactly that, but it's similar to that. And we have done things like One Order and Grenta, which are, One Order is about supply chains to hotels and restaurants. And so restaurants can buy online digitally and can have the products delivered to them in their restaurant, I guess, or hotel. And Grenta does the same thing for pharmacies. And so looking at the pharmaceutical industry. So we're building this mesh at Nclude of both enablers and verticals, meaningful verticals, where we're trying to bring digitization into the industry for all the financial transactions. So payments, supply, credit, everything.
Yeah, it's interesting because the way that you guys describe yourselves, you guys don't really, in all of your marketing materials on your website, you don't call yourselves a venture capital firm. You call yourselves a fintech innovation platform.
Correct. Yeah.
And this is because you're trying to build the stack of all of these fintechs that plug into different parts of society and build up that.
Yeah, it's the sum is greater than the parts strategy. The companies in our portfolio work together. Grenta's payment system is based on PayMob's technology. Lucky's processing using, I don't know, this company. They're all working together. Yeah. And so knowing that technology is something that takes some time to build, it's, expensive. You want people to focus on the problem they're trying to solve and then use everybody else's technology to enable that to happen as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So yes, I hate platform, but there you go. It's a word.
And Egypt is going through a crisis right now.
Yes. Unfortunately, it hasn't been the easiest couple of years for the Egyptian economy. I'm not a macroeconomist, and I'm not going to sit here and dissect for you all the reasons, causes, and effect. But the net impact of all of this is that you're seeing a lot of pressure on the currency, on the foreign exchange, and on the country's reserves, if you like, meaning life is becoming very expensive. Inflation is in the 35-38% this last couple of years. That's a very high number. You talk about food inflation, 60-something. Life has become a lot more difficult for everybody. From a technology point of view, what does that mean? It means that startups which are growing have to now grow higher than a much, than a kind of a very high bar, if that makes sense. What I'm trying to say is, if you grow by 10% in a year where currency is devaluing by 100%, you haven't grown, you've gone backwards, right? Because investors buy and sell shares in US dollars. And so you now have to grow at over 100% every year in order to just simply get back to zero, right? From a dollar perspective. And so that's putting a lot of pressure. It makes it very difficult for investors to believe that anybody can sustain that level of growth for a long time until they see the country stabilize. And that hasn't happened yet. There's just an election, and so that election will now see all the consequences of it. I'm sure the outcome is well known, but more of the decisions that will happen after the election with, is there another devaluation to the currency? What else do we need to see happen? So very long story to say, yeah, this hasn't been the easiest couple of years. It makes a strategy like Nclude very, very difficult to execute. Not because it doesn't drive inclusion, but it doesn't achieve the second objective, which is making financial returns for the investors. There's no point in building a platform if it's not sustainable.
Yeah. So, Basil, we always end these with 3 quick-fire questions, if you can answer them as intuitively and quickly as possible. Yeah. What's in a perfect pitch?
The founder.
Okay, I was going to ask you that earlier. Is it founder or is it the idea? And it's always the founder or founding team. Okay. What's your biggest pet peeve when it comes to entrepreneurs coming up to you and pitching to you?
Them not knowing the type of things that I'm interested in, because most investors leave a lot of breadcrumbs all over the place. We talk about it on stage events, and somebody walks up to me and starts talking to me about investments, I don't know, in a country that I am not interested in, a sector I'm not interested in. I just think it immediately discredits, right, the ability to even listen at that point.
Yeah. And what's the best piece of advice you've ever got?
Think 2 steps ahead. It came from my brother, Samir. And he said it to me at a very young age. He's 5 years older than I am, so he gets the advantage of being the older one. I get the advantage of being the smarter one, I guess. No,
Sure.
I'm sure. I want to put it on record. Anyway, my comment is actually, what his comment was about was, don't ever answer the question around what do you want to do next or how you're going to make the next move. Tell me what's going to happen after that. And if you know that throughout your life, actually, a lot of things become clear. So if your next job is you want to become a president 2 moves down, then you need to be a minister or a senator before it. You're not going to become president without passing through that. So if you want to build a global business, you need to show that your product can scale in more than one market. Don't come and talk to me about a global business when you haven't yet got it off the ground in one market. And if you want to talk about global, you better be in 2 markets so that we can start talking about global. So it's always about kind of that 2 steps ahead thought. If you play chess, it's a common way of thinking. No, you never worry about your next move. It's always in front of you. There's lots of options. The question is what happens once you do your step, then what will the response be? And therefore, what should be your second step? If you can figure that out, you always know where to go.
I love that. Basil, thank you so much for your time today. I'm always impressed by the investors actually in the region and the wealth of knowledge that you have. It's just, I know that it's going to help a lot of founders and a lot of entrepreneurs out there and a lot of potential investors as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate having you here. Thanks. Hey there. Thanks for joining this conversation. If you enjoyed that episode and you want to start researching potential investors for your startup's fundraising strategy, go to luciditynsights.com and sign up now to the startup registration package by clicking the plans button on the top right corner. We look forward to having you join our future conversations and checking out our additional content. Until next time, stay hungry and stay humble.